Storm to Cyclops. Mission accomplished. We are coming out.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now somewhere in upstate New York. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I cannot complain. So far, so good. People are really enjoying the video versions of our podcast. It only took us 213 episodes to start doing it. But it's happening. And if you want to see our video versions of the podcast, you have to join our Patreon, at least for now. We might figure out a way to give them an exclusive, but give other folks an opportunity to see it on YouTube. But for now, people are enjoying it. Lots of good feedback.
Good. Let's see how long I can keep up video content.
We also began our analysis of X-Men, the animated series. By the way, something that I noticed when I was editing the last episode, I mentioned that my very first X-Men comic was 213.
Okay.
Our very first X-Men, the animated series episode is 213.
It's meant to be.
Yeah. So,
wow.
So that happened.
That's cute.
Yeah. It's adorable even. All right. Once again, we're going to be covering X-Men, the animated series. This episode is going to be covering the second part of the pilot episode, Night of the Sentinels, part 2. Drea, before we get into that, I know you had a couple of announcements you wanted to make.
Yeah. So very quickly, if folks are making their way out to LA Comic-Con, I will be there on December 3rd.
You will?
Yes. I'll be there. I will. The Arkham Sessions will be there / I will be a panelist on a very fun panel all about the psychology of Arkham Asylum. So it's very fitting to the show, of course, but also there'll be the panel will include a number of specialists, folks who are also clinicians and mental health professionals, who will be talking about each of the characters who end up in Arkham Asylum, which I think is really fun, as well as some of the deeper themes and theories about a place like Arkham Asylum existing in the Batman universe and what it must be like for those individuals, those identities to navigate that landscape.
That's cool.
So yeah, it'll be super fun. So that will be December 3rd at LA Comic-Con, and I'll put all the information online on my website. Secondly, if you haven't already seen it, please check out the new fandom / Screen Junkies video that I did with them. It's all about the psychology of Spider-Man. It's called Does Spider-Man Need Therapy? And it's, again, a deep dive into the psychology and mental health of a specific character of Spider-Man. And we're not just focusing on one spider person. We're looking at Miles Morales. We're looking at Peter Parker. We're looking at multiple Peter Parkers. And we're also talking about when the Peter Parkers meet each other. So sorry, spoiler, multiverse stuff. But it's, again, a fun exploration of the psychology of Spider-Man, and it's already up. It's on Phantom Entertainment, and I just put it on my website as well.
Fantastic. I also have an announcement. This is not for us. This is not a convention we will be attending, unlike LA Comic-Con. But it is a convention that the folks we're talking about will be attending. And it's actually next weekend, November 17th through the 19th. This will be Toy Federation's Retro Toy Convention. This will be in South Carolina. And basically everyone you might want to see from X-Men the Animated Series will be there, including Eric and Julia Lewald, writers, cast members, There's actually a really cool event that's happening as well. That is going to be a pizza party, an uncanny Friday night X-Men cast pizza party, including dinner with the cast and showrunners, event exclusive print, trading card set with random autographed signature series card, souvenir cup, a souvenir retro placemat, and an event themed pizza box. So go over to Retro Toy Convention, get your ticket for that. That's $100 for that experience. But it sounds like an awesome experience. I wish we could actually be there. And yeah, so if you're going to be in this area of South Carolina next weekend, November 17th through the 19th, be sure to check them out. And if you do, tell them we sent you, because we absolutely love Eric and Julia Lewald. And whenever we get an opportunity to communicate with them, even through listeners, we will do it.
Awesome. Also, see if you can grab one of those X-Men hats that they have.
Previously on X-Men hats?
Those hats are adorable.
Yeah, they're pretty great. So previously on X-Men, we basically talked about our introduction to the X-Men in general, because there wasn't necessarily a whole lot to pick up on psychologically in the first episode, because we were basically being introduced to all of these characters. The primary character, of course, was Jubilation Lee, a teen mutant.
I just thought about that too. Like, is that supposed to be a secret name? Like Jubilee.
I think Jubilee's her nickname.
Jubilee's a portmanteau of her her first and last name.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's not supposed to be a disguised name.
But also bless anybody who decided to name their kid Jubilation. That's the best.
You think her foster parents? No,
she's already a teenager.
That's true. That's true. So this was her original name.
Somebody gave it to her. Maybe she gave it to herself. And she, when she entered the foster care system, she was like, yeah, my name's Jubilation. Yeah. I have no idea. But funny story, for a long time when I was a kid, I not only loved this character, but I loved the name so much that I would tell my parents I just looked forward to getting married and having kids so that I could name my daughter Jubilation Lee, so I could call her Jubilee. Yeah, it was all because of this character and the comics and the animated series, and just because it's a cool name.
It is a cool name.
So anyway, there's that. But Jubilee gets herself caught after going to the mall, getting into a battle with the Sentinels. Her foster father called to have her entered onto the Mutant Registration Act. And that, of course, triggered the Sentinels to come grab her for what nefarious reason we don't yet know. But the X-Men end up helping her in her struggle against the Sentinels. They end up taking her back to the X-Manor, and she wakes up, is a bit scared about why she's there, doesn't know who the X-Men are. They are currently an underground organization. And in her attempt to escape, she ends up getting caught, and the X-Men go to rescue her. And that is where we have left off.
And in the last episode, we talked very briefly about this rejection of the association between her and the X-Men, or really mutants in general. She's aware she's a mutant. She's exploring the new powers that she has. And there's this disconnect. Like, here are these people who have all these odd characteristics, and they're somewhat militant, and they're clearly trained, and they're brandishing all of these different abilities that they have.
And have wild costumes.
And they have pretty outlandish costumes. And they scare her off in the sense that even though she, deep down inside, she knows that she's like them, she rejects this connection. She doesn't really want to be in association with them. She's she's still exploring whether this is the community she really feels like she belongs to.
Yeah.
So that leaves her kind of feeling like, okay, so I'm not like my parents. I'm not like the humans that have taken me in. I'm not like these other people at the mall. I'm not really like the X-Men. So who am I?
Mhm.
I think there's like a loneliness that she's going through. And
it's also I mean, I don't think it's any secret or coincidence that mutant abilities start to present themselves during puberty. This is definitely a metaphor for puberty as well. And so she's just a teen trying to get by every day, going through these changes, and she has many more changes than any normal teen her age at this point.
We know from the comics that some mutants are born with some physical attributes that clearly denote that they're mutants, and others, but yet, as we talked about before, their phenotype doesn't necessarily determine or dictate their abilities, their mutant abilities, their non-human abilities. And then you're right, it's during the adolescence phase that they really start to manifest, that these powers and abilities come through. And that combination of how they see themselves, how society sees them, and then what their bodies are actually doing create this detachment from the bigger society, this knowledge of, I'm not quite like everyone else. And it makes perfect sense that the folks that you should find connection and community with are other mutants.
Yeah.
But they're not, at this time at least, they're not in a safe haven. They're not integrated with society in the way that feels safe or that feels like there's a sense of belongingness and equality. And it to me, it seems like if I were her foster parents, I'd probably be totally fine with her joining the academy, at least at this time, the sense of the gifted school. So the sense that that's where she'll be around people just like her, and she'll learn
if
acceptance.
You're understanding, because clearly he is terrified of her, and so that's why he reports her.
The father,
but and the mother seems to be a bit more passive. She seems to like Jubilee. We don't know how long she's been there, but she seems to like Jubilee enough, and by the end of this episode, it's clear that she loves Jubilee like a parent.
Like she's her
asking, daughter. We're going to see you, right? We'll occasionally see you. Meanwhile, the dad is just standing there. By this point, he's redeemed himself. But I mean, if I were Jubilee, I'm like, do I want to come back to this house? I don't know.
Yeah,
we should discuss why. But the very first thing I want to talk about actually is a behind the scenes little piece of information for you, Drea. Last time I said that we've been using, or we will be using, as almost a textbook, Eric Lawald's book previously on X-Men, The Making of an Animated Series. This is literally a book that would be so incredibly beneficial to anyone who decided they wanted to make a cartoon series, especially one based on a popular IP for a network. It runs down everything from determining who the characters are that you're going to focus on to determining what they're going to look like, because X-Men had been around since the 60s. Which incarnation are we going to use? It also talks about breaking down the episodes and the scripts. It really is so incredibly helpful, but it's also a really good kind of memoir on what it took to make this series. And there's a little piece here toward the beginning that I found interesting, and I'd like to get your take just on, well, I'll read it first and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
One of the rules that Eric wanted to abide by in the creation of this series was to not write down to children. And of course, we've seen other animated series that have refused to write down to children. I would call Batman the Animated Series a contemporary to X-Men, one of these examples. But in his book, he says, in quotes, comics and cartoons, gotta dumb it down, end quote. And then another quote, we wouldn't want to upset or challenge the kids, end quote. Child psychologists swear by their fees that the young must be coddled and narrowly written for. They spoke with child psychologists about how to tackle a kind of adult centric animated series like X-Men. And while the child psychologists were telling them a number of things, one of those things being you got to have one character, like one main character. So it's not an X team.
Mm.
Who's it going to be?
Have a focal point.
Because children will not understand, or they'll have difficulty following if there are too many characters. Now, of course, they proved them wrong by creating a team of characters that kids ended up loving. And he even says in the book, you know, what do experts know? But tell me about this time period in television and entertainment and specifically from the perspective of a psychologist now, looking back at child psychologists then.
Yeah.
Was this all about nothing? Was it, you know, is this something that isn't really a factor in the stages of growing up for children? Was it important for Eric and Julia to write scripts that were dumbed down for kids?
Well, I think that certainly this is one of the shows that connected with kids.
Yeah.
There were a handful of shows, right? There were a lot of Saturday morning cartoons and other types of shows. You know, let's do a little bit of contrast, right? Like Hanna-Barbera, let's say. Those are the kinds of animated shows or cartoons that were full of multiple characters. You weren't always following one character necessarily. You had mixtures of action and, you know, adventure, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor, and in some cases with some animation, adult-level jokes.
Particularly Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
I mean, those shows are basically written for adults and animated for children.
Yeah, and we actually, it's bringing me back to a conversation we had about Harley Quinn and the Joker and the animated series, and how such serious topics were brought into those episodes, and that because the visage, because the method, the way in which the media was brought to youth in this kind of slapstick style, very bright and colorful tone, they were able to kind of squeeze in and bring in some of the heavier, more serious suggestions and themes.
Yeah.
And it's not a surprise to me, like even with Batman the Animated Series, which itself is somewhat of a dark show, Harley Quinn and the Joker are some of the most bright, most colorful, most exhilarating, you know, very kind of high energy characters. Those are going to grab youth right away.
I think back to, and it may even be the moment that you're thinking of, and we sort of bashed the episode for doing this, but the moment that he kicks her out, and unlike the rest of the series where, you know, a punch from Batman might send you across the room unrealistically, but when Joker throws her out of the hideout and she very cartoonishly flies out the door and lands on her butt, the way that a cartoon character like Looney Tunes,
right, like Wile E. Coyote could totally be kicked across the screen and land on his butt. And it would be funny. Yeah.
It's done in a comedic way. Whereas you and I were saying, but what's going on here is so dark and sinister that we don't know if it was okay for it to be funny. Like, is it okay that we're laughing at this visual when clearly he's being abusive? And so, yeah, I do remember those talks, especially.
So I think with X-Men 2, there's some sense of layered entertainment that really young kids can probably watch this and see action and adventure and superheroes, going into combat and fighting robots and explosions and blasts and things that are really high energy and I think at the surface not really harmful. Now, the 80s and 90s are really interesting, too, because you had such a diverse array of different kinds of animation, different kinds of shows. I'm trying to think back on when the Power Rangers came out. Wasn't it around the same time, right? So the aspect of fighting, like superhero fighting and superheroes teaming up to challenge the villain, those are kinds of things that were very normal.
Even Power Rangers had very specific, very strict rules not from Haim Saban, but from networks and standards and practices. Like, if I remember correctly, regarding the fight scenes, you could never punch anyone in the face.
Oh, really? So I won't see like the Red Ranger punch someone in the face. I feel like I've seen this.
It's always the chest. It's always, and it's usually comical in nature, but if they kick them, they're kicking them in the chest. If they punch them, usually when the Rangers punch the putties and the putties disintegrate, they're specifically punching them in a particular emblem in the center of their chest, as if that's the protective, you got to protect that emblem at all costs. Otherwise you'll disintegrate into nothing. It was very strict rules about what kind of violence you could show kids on TV. And that was one of them. Can't punch them in the face because kids are going to go and punch each other in the face.
Right. And I think, let's address what the child psychologist was saying. I really applaud the X-Men story editors, Eric and Julia, for ensuring that the story itself wasn't dumbed down, wasn't washed out, wasn't muted in order to get the ideas and the emotions and the concepts out there. But what they did, and this is very clear in the episode that we're talking about today, there's a character who is seriously injured and captured, and there's another character who is attacked and dies. The way that it's animated and the way that the dialogue happens around it is kind of layered around the actual violence and trauma. So you don't actually see, we got to spoil it, right? So Morph is the character. And look, I'm not too upset about this because Morph annoyed the S out of me and was a character that didn't exist in the comics, right? They created this character for the show.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Mostly no.
Oh.
Morph is very clearly based on a character from the 60s called Changeling.
Okay, right. A shapeshifter.
A shapeshifter. And when they modeled Morph on Changeling, he looks just like him. And
I wonder, too, if they changed the character because they knew this character was not going to make it through the end of the show. So, like,
I want to talk about
kill off the character. So side.
Let's
put it on the shelf.
There are thoughts.
So the character Morph, again, a character who wasn't necessarily my top favorite.
It's voice, right? It's the nasally high pitch. It's like that character is going to get annoying real fast.
It's the voice, and it's also the hijinks.
Yeah,
the humor.
Yeah.
Don't do that to me. Don't change shape and come at me and disguise yourself and joke on me. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And I don't like it when you do it to my friends. Now, is it a cool ability when you're infiltrating a government agency to grab the files?
Right.
Yes, very, very cool stuff. But Mystique does it better. Someone who's not on the show right now. I'm just saying, not my favorite character. However, for one of the X-Men, especially a core team member, to die, it's a heavy thing. It's upsetting, and it happens in the second episode.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the aftermath and the way that some of the characters experience that grief. But what I really like about the episode is that part of the story isn't disguised. I mean, let's use that that concept. It's talked about pretty directly. It's addressed. It's taken very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's not shown directly. You don't see any kind of violence inflicted on Morph. There's no there's no dismemberment or explosion or injury that would be really upsetting for kids to see.
Something I did notice in this viewing of it, when Morph dies, we see the Sentinel reach out toward the camera and fire red blasts out of its hands. And then there are reactions from the other characters that are like, Morph. Meanwhile, Beast then gets the exact same thing happen to him. It throws him back. We see it hit him. It throws him back. He's then electrified on a fence. And we hear, ugh!
Yeah,
I mean,
his whole body's convulsing. It's really upsetting,
That
actually.
guy is getting it real bad.
Yeah.
But maybe because of the strength of Beast or whatever.
He clearly survives the attack.
So we can show violence to the character if he's just hurt.
But
we can't show Morph get killed.
Yeah, I also feel like, look, Beast is less human looking.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something a little bit more comfortable, or that's the wrong word, like more tolerable, I guess, with seeing someone like Beast get thrown against a fence, being electrocuted and falling and kind of convulsing. But we do see him survive that. So there's concern for him, but not a suggestion that he doesn't survive. The interesting part about the comment from the child psychologist is, I'd say not all psychologists, and certainly at the time, not all child psychologists would have said that. Right. We would have had a variety of different recommendations and reactions. And just like in the same way that a lot of our shows now have that rating, that
like TV wise.
Yeah, those ratings that help us understand what level or development, what age group is best for being a typical audience member for that show. We didn't really have that system back in the 80s and 90s. And so adults and parents and caregivers kind of had to make the decision. And I think a lot of our parents, if you were in a generation that grew up in the 80s and 90s, they didn't even know what you were watching because you were just coming home from school, grabbing the key from under the mat, microwaving
waking up on a Saturday morning, going straight downstairs and putting on the TV.
Heating up a Hot Pocket, getting some Fanta or a Cactus cooler or something, just watching these shows. So there was a lot of autonomy, a lot less scrutiny necessarily, like in the household. Aside from, as in your experience, the parents that were reading the newspaper about games, video games, gaming consoles, D&D, animated shows, and you
really say my experience because my parents wouldn't let me have a video game console growing up because they read a child psychologist in the newspaper who said that video games were bad, Nintendo specifically bad.
We didn't really have all the data to make these determinations. There a lot of those theories and a lot of those statements were based on assumption and based on relationships, correlates, like, the bad kid had been watching violent TV shows or playing violent games, and it was more of a correlation and not like really an understanding of whether there was causation there.
D&D especially, because it was because one kid went missing and they were like, well, he plays D&D. D&D must be satanic. D&D must be evil, and that created an entire stigma just because one kid disappeared. So
I'd say you don't have to dumb down the show, to argue with that other psychologist. You don't have to dumb down the show. But I would agree, and maybe this is what they meant. You certainly don't want to show very disturbing, graphic violent images and interactions
Sure.
that a young person wouldn't be ready for. Can you talk about grief and loss? Can you talk about the aspects of injury and death and persecution and loneliness and confusion, all the things that this show does a great job of highlighting, and those are all themes that are foregrounded. These aren't secondary parts of the story. Those are the main parts of the story.
Yeah.
So perhaps, and I know that they're very proud of the work that they've done with this show, that the story editors likely did their due diligence about, what can we animate? What can we really translate from the comics? But we know this isn't a time slot that's for kids. How do we do that translation? How do we convert that in a way that's both entertaining and also psychologically rich? And they've really found this excellent balance of that so many of us feel helped shape us and help drive our moral sense, our emotional senses, and the way in which we actually attune ourselves to entertainment.
Yeah. As we carry on in the episode, I should say I made a mistake a few moments ago when I was recapping. The X-Men didn't go to the facility to rescue Jubilee. They went to destroy the files, all the registration files, both digital and hard copies.
That's the mutant control.
Yeah.
That's the mutant control agency.
Yes. Do you want to talk about the death here for a moment? Because we're right there.
Sure.
They go, they destroy what files they can. The Sentinels attack. They kill Morph. So Morph is based on a character from the 60s named Changeling. Technically, I think he was the Changeling. He was second in command to a villain by the name of Mutant Master.
Mutant Master?
Yeah, who had created a group of villains called Factor 3. And Mutant Master's whole plan was to get the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a nuclear war, which would then destroy all of mankind, because Mutant Master was actually an alien here undercover.
Oh,
sort of
using
a
mutant, so using a mutant identity as a disguise to infiltrate our world.
Yes, to start a war between these two super nations, so that all
doesn't
of
help
humanity...
the reputation of mutants.
Right.
Oh.
So Factor 3 then turned against him once they found everything out, and helped the X-Men defeat Mutant Master. Then, oddly, Changeling comes to Professor X and says, hey, I just came back from the doctor. Because I guess when you're a supervillain, you still go to get your checkup. I found out I've only got like 6 months to live. It has made me take consideration into my past history of doing evil deeds. I now want to use those last 6 months of my life doing something important and great, and I want to join you and help you and all of that. And Xavier says, great, I know exactly what you can do. You can become me.
I'm sorry. Why? What?
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
So what happened is Xavier needed to go underground to prepare for another incoming alien invasion, and didn't want the X-Men to know he was gone. So he recruited Changeling to become him, even going so far as to give him some of his mutant powers so that he could still do everything Xavier does. And during a battle,
I think I know where this is going.
Xavier is killed.
The Changeling is killed as Xavier. Got
Changeling is killed as Xavier. So really what they did is they retconned Xavier's death. And they were like, no, he didn't actually die. It was Changeling. And let's show you what the scene,
wow.
Whatever. And so that is basically where this is coming from, is this character who wasn't really well known, but clearly served the purpose of dying. He was created to die in the name, for the animated series, in order to up the game for kids,
Oh my gosh, what a tremendous plot point here.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel, even how you describe it is really interesting, but it doesn't feel superficial. It doesn't feel that we're sort of manipulated here.
Here's where I take issue. And I realize that this is 2023 Brian talking about an animated show that was written in the early 90s. It was not originally supposed to be Morph or even Changeling. And by the way, the reason they couldn't use the name Changeling is because Beast Boy over at DC had been using the name Changeling for quite some time. And no one had ever really heard of Changeling at Marvel since he died. So, they just couldn't use the name.
Okay.
But he wasn't originally the character that was going to die in this moment. It was a character by the name of Thunderbird, who was a Native American. You may have seen him or his brother, Warpath, big, hulking Native American character, feather, bird, big red bird on his blue costume. Created, by the way, by our old friend Len Wein. But that character was supposed to sort of mirror his own fate in the comics, which was mission number 2, Thunderbird dies. And the whole thing was Len and the gang had decided to create a character that they could kill off. And it was going to be a big shock where it was, right off the bat, dead. Mm-hmm. Anything could happen. Because this was like the 3rd iteration of the X-Men at the time.
Okay.
He was introduced in what you were referring to, the giant-sized X-Men #1.
Yeah, where a bunch of people are introduced.
Yes.
Storm's introduced. I think Wolverine's introduced.
So he, during his second mission, they end up killing him off. And actually there's a quote by Chris Claremont, who we'll talk to, or we'll talk about a lot going forward in this series of the show. But Claremont says that it was Len who ultimately decided to kill the character off, saying he figured there are 2 ways to do this. One, you spend years, if not decades, building up a relationship between the audience and a character, building the emotional bonds between them. So when something happens to that character, the audience is devastated. Or you do it right off the bat when no one is expecting it. And
it's a different devastation because you're shocked and you're dealing with something very unexpected. You started to attach to a character. You're basically forecasting that there's going to be more storytelling with them, and that attachment gets disrupted right away. Right. So it's a different kind of relational trauma. The first one is one that hurts a lot, right? Yeah. Somebody who you're following and you feel connected to, and
it's that parasocial relationship that you talked about.
The writer kills them off, and you truly feel a real sense of loss. And this has been studied in the psychology field to show that people do express and experience very, very real emotions when a fictional character is killed off on some kind of series or some kind of ongoing show or cinematic universe, for instance. The other one, it's kind of, when Game of Thrones, for instance, started doing that and people were people were shocked at this. This is the kind of storytelling that's been happening in comics for a long time. The concept of introducing a character and the audience losing that character within a few episodes or within a few issues isn't super uncommon.
Yeah.
But again, the way that it's done here, I'll say, how many times can I say I just truly don't like Morph as a character? But but the way that it's done here, it's really the reactions of the other X-Men.
Oh yeah.
That
I mean, Jean loses
tear us
contact with
apart.
him instantly, knows exactly what's happened. She then tells Xavier to use his psychic abilities to check in with him, and he can't feel anything morph related. So they know he's gone. And you see tears streaming down people's faces. Wolverine takes it incredibly personally because he's not allowed to go back and try to help him and Beast. But here's the 2023 part of me that's sort of annoyed with the decision not to make it Thunderbird.
Okay.
Again, I'm going to reference X-Men, the art and making of the animated series, again, written by Eric and Julia Lewald. Like I said, we're going to talk about these books a lot as we embark on this series. But in chapter 1, he says that at first we chose Thunderbird, a major new generation X-Man who had in fact been killed in the comics while helping the X-Men. True. Blew up in an airplane by ripping it apart. In fact, that's why there is a villain in the opening credits that looks just like Thunderbird. It's his twin brother, Warpath, which he had in the comics.
Right.
Thunderbird's animation model had already been designed, so using Warpath for the opening credits saved the design team precious drawing time. Then someone in authority suggested that killing off the only Native American X-Man on our core team might not be a wise idea. So the sacrificial team member was changed to the shapeshifter Changeling, who had sacrificed himself for Professor X in the books in 1968. So here's where I take issue with this. The decision is made not to kill Thunderbird. So we just don't include Thunderbird.
The fact that there could have been a Thunderbird.
He says they already created the character model. Like the design work had already been done. So now by not killing the only Native American character,
you've killed the Native American character.
By not
including them in the first place, you've erased them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. I what could have been, right? I wish that we would have seen that character. And would I have been upset that they killed off the only Indigenous person who's on the show, human and or mutant? Yeah, I think I would be. I think I would have noticed as a young person. I certainly would notice that now. But it's too bad that it was an all or nothing decision.
Yeah. Like, now we've got to go and create another character, including like we've got to now design the character personality. We've now got to write the dialogue. We've now got to create a character model. But you had him. He was right there.
It's weird.
So it that bothers me a little bit. And I promise, like this isn't a show where we're going to pick on the creators of the animated series. For starters, we love them to death. And we know that nothing is created in a vacuum. These aren't all their decisions.
Right.
And you really do learn how much control they did and didn't have when you read these books. But it's a show that we love. There are just certain moments that are very early 90s mentality.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Well, let's talk about some of the different reactions that the X-Men have to the death of Morph.
Yeah.
We know, for instance, that Wolverine, as you mentioned, has a very rageful, angry, helpless reaction. He's blaming other characters. Specifically, he targets Cyclops. And it's interesting how the story unfolds. We don't really see what happens. The incident of being attacked by the Sentinels takes place, and then before we know it, they're back.
They're home again.
Safely with Professor X.
Yeah.
So you don't see what happens right away, but there's that exchange, a really combative exchange between Wolverine and Cyclops. And I kind of liked it. I indulged in it. And this is the tension and conflict and personality clash that these two characters are going to have. And so this is one of the first times that we see how they are very well loved. These are two characters who a lot of us just adore, but have very different styles. And I think a lot of us can see these two sides of the situation.
It's Captain America and Iron Man again. In many ways. Okay. There are a lot of people who believe that it's a similar sort of dichotomy where you're going to have Wolverine, who's going to wear every emotion he's ever had on his sleeve. And then you've got Scott, who is going to be a very proper commander.
Yes, he does the right thing.
Decisions sometimes.
He's very practical. He goes by the manual. He goes by the book. He needed to, and so yes, he needed to get the team out of the field.
And he even says, "I'm not going to apologize for making command decisions." You know, like that's something that.
Well, you could still apologize, though. You could apologize for the outcome. You could apologize for the sorrow. You could apologize for, participating in something that ultimately led to the death of someone on the team. There's lots of reasons that an apology can be well received, can make sense. Someone needs that. Other people might need that apology. The way that Scott handles it right away, like initially, is this very kind of steady, logical reaction with a reliance on this is how the system is. This is what we do. I don't have a choice.
And his whole thing is needs of the many. Again, where it's I can't risk any of you getting hurt or killed or captured. It's time for us to leave, regroup, and think about this. And
there's so few of us compared to humans.
Yeah.
And we're a persecuted group. We have to look out. I don't hate him for the decision. What's kind of cool about this episode is it's Wolverine who flashes back. So he has kind of a memory come to him. And then we see what occurred through his eyes. Mm-hmm. And what occurred in terms of his interpretation is the Sentinels attack. Morph is, directly hit. Beast gets
sacrificing himself, pushing Wolverine out of the way.
Right. So he saves Wolverine and he's in the line of fire and he gets hit. Beast gets slammed against the electric fence and is disarmed. And that's Wolverine's interpretation, which may be very close to what actually happened. The interesting thing is, right away, Wolverine is reacting with this, hostility. He has visceral reactions to this. He's physical, he's combative, he's angry. He destroys one of the vehicles. It's like
he didn't destroy it. He converted it into a convertible for Scott. He takes the roof off of his car.
Yeah,
like how they each have a car.
Oh yeah, and he has his own Jeep.
Yeah, he's got his own.
He takes.
It's a very Wrangler, rugged off-road Jeep.
Yeah. So Logan's going to do his own thing, and he keeps saying that. Mm-hmm. I do my own thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a part of this team. Yes, we can agree on the goals. We can agree on the objectives. I know in my heart what's right to do. The thing about this extraction, if you will, is that Wolverine was relieved of a choice, is the kindest way to put it. So Rogue puts her hand on him when he's basically saying, in the midst of all of this violence, he's saying, I'm going to go in and get my friends. I'm going to go in and get Beast and Morph. And Rogue uses her powers to disarm him.
Yeah.
And he becomes this sort of weak, vulnerable, barely conscious mutant. And he still can cognitively know I'm trying to help my friends, but he's so weakened by this action that he has no choice. He has to acquiesce, and they take him back.
And the last thing he says is, "Don't leave Morph and Beast." Yeah,
it's kind of sad.
It is.
And so I have mixed feelings about.
And by the way, if there's a character that you could trust to go in there and just mess some stuff up, Wolverine's going to be that guy.
Sure.
Not only does he have the adamantium claws and the rage, he also has the healing factor. So, can you kill this guy? Probably not.
Mhm.
You know, you could probably do some severe damage, but he's going to come back and he's going to just destroy your facility
Yeah.
again, twice
Yeah.
as bad than the last
But they
time.
didn't trust him. They were in a panic. They were in an escalated level of emotions, and
Yeah.
they needed to just extract him and get him back home. And I feel because he didn't consent to that, that there was a betrayal there. There's sort of like, if you already have a character who doesn't feel like he's trusted,
Yeah.
who doesn't quite fit in, you know, in terms of like X-Men already feeling like they're left out. The X-Men, the X-person who feels left out of the X-Men is Wolverine. And to further sort of elevate that sense of mistrust, and you're not a part of us, and we don't agree with your decisions, we have to subdue you. We basically have to, like, you know, render you unconscious for us to get along. I felt very angry at that decision, and I felt like he didn't have consent for that. And was it the right thing to do?
Yeah. Could I flip that a little bit and ask you, now let's look at it from the other perspective. Not only are you part of us, you are so important to this team. We will not let you get hurt or killed or captured. You have to come back with your family, and
this is us protecting you.
And not only are we protecting you, but we can't go through this level of pain for any more people. And by insisting on going, you are now putting us in further pain, not knowing the outcome.
Oh, so he's a liability.
No, not a liability. Emotionally, if you go off on your own, we're going to be left wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
Is he alive? Is he hurt? Is he dead? Is he captured? Is he given up the location of the X Mansion? Like,
yeah, there's all sorts of
but
vulnerabilities. And I think, you know, what I appreciate about it is that you're bringing in this military tactic that I think you're probably more insightful about than I am. This sense that this is what, not necessarily this is what we trained for, but we have strategies that we fully know about and that we need to utilize in order to protect ourselves and to survive what has become catastrophic. And so now we're at like red level. At this time, we just need to extract everybody. This is not the time to go in and attack.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an acceptable
too many casualties. Yeah. So I appreciate that. I guess a psychologist in me is like, okay, so when do you talk about it? Where's the debriefing? Like, come back together in the, you know, the big room that Professor X works in, or maybe something more comfortable. Like,
a number of them try. Jean tries. She actually chases him out of the you know, when he cuts the roof top off of Scott's car. She's like trying to get him to stop and stay and talk to him.
Yeah.
But you're right. There is no sit down and discuss. Logan isn't really that guy anymore.
He's not. He hasn't been. And both of those reactions, Cyclops being quite practical and doing what he thinks is right based on his moral sense and based on what his training is and what his leadership style is, versus Wolverine, who's been successful through being combative and hostile, through the powerful nature of his abilities. He does the surprise attack. He has these killer claws. He knows that he can really make a difference through brute force, not through logic, not through strategy necessarily, but through kind of a combination. And those reactions, although they're quite different, those reactions are both realistic. Like, I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, you know, Cyclops that's not a normal reaction. They're both actually very normal reactions given their personalities and where they fit in the team.
Yeah.
And I think Wolverine, especially, a lot of us, and I think honestly at that time, a lot of the young audiences absolutely relate to that. Maybe my parent or someone would have been logical and strategic.
Yeah.
But I would have been emotional and reactive, and I wanted to lash out too.
Yeah.
Those reactions, I'm actually not saying those are immature reactions. I'm saying those are very emotional reactions that adults have kind of learned to oppress, and navigate differently, but we still have them. And for Wolverine to show the intensity of that reaction, I think is good for us. That's grief. Grief is anger. Grief is lashing out. Grief is redirecting it to toward destruction. And is that necessarily unhealthy? No. Can it be unsafe? Absolutely. It can put him and other people in harm's way.
Yeah.
The other part about Wolverine is, look, he is, let's relate this to what happens in the bar. A little bit later, Wolverine is in his street clothes.
Yep.
As Logan in a bar
playing pool.
Couldn't remember if there was alcohol in there. Probably not, right? Because this is a kid's show.
Well, there were probably bottles.
Yeah. And he's kind of rough with the other folks in the other patrons in the bar, and of course,
well, they pick on him.
Yeah, I was going to say,
pick on him.
Yeah,
as well.
they notice him. They notice that he's a little extra furry, and they realize he's different, and their assumptions are taken, and they clock him as a mutant.
Well, they don't clock him as a mutant until his claws come out,
right?
And then they go, "Oh, so sorry, you're like, he's a mutant. Get out of here. We don't serve your kind."
Yes. And it reminds me too that when Cyclops shows up at the bar, by the way, I didn't remember this, but now it's grabbing my attention that Cyclops has pretty amazing outfits when he's in his street clothes, when he's in his normie clothes.
Oh yeah.
Those the like tie and business suit and the jackets and all the button up stuff that he wears. I had never noticed it before, but he is
like a professional.
He is stylish.
Yeah.
But my point is related to this. Not just me admiring him.
And that's juxtaposed with Logan's
rough looking.
Logan's leather coat with the fur collar, the blue jeans, the plaid shirt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can imagine Logan can try to wear the things that Cyclops wears, and it wouldn't matter. People are still going to realize that, again, he has a phenotype that is strange and different, odd, not quite human. Mm-hmm. And when he gets angry, it's clear that he's a mutant. That tells me a lot about how they're reacting to grief, because in a way, they're both trapped in their personal repertoire of emotional limitations. That Cyclops is, for the most part, seen as this upstander and put together, and he doesn't have maybe the permission to just lose control. Like, let me just take get these goddamn glasses off and lose my effing mind.
And not only that, I mean, unlike Wolverine, who was instantly ready to throw down, Scott makes a joke and says, "You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would you?" With his ruby lenses, special ruby lenses. And
the man can't navigate the world. The man can't be in the world without being in total control, or he will completely destroy everything.
Can I interrupt you only to read? One of my favorite things to do when we first started this podcast was read portions of the Writer's Bible. And luckily, because of these two books, we have it here for this series.
Okay.
You want me to read you the description that Eric and the gang wrote for Cyclops versus Wolverine?
Yes.
So Cyclops, also known as Scott. Cyclops was born Scott Summers. He's a 26-year-old American He was Xavier's first X-Man and is the leader in the field. Unless covered by a visor or glasses, his eyes, when opened, will shoot out a horribly destructive optic energy beam. More than other mutants, he must work to control his superpower. Scott is a true rule follower, a lieutenant who goes strictly by the book. For Cyclops, there's a right way and a wrong way of doing things. His major fear is letting Xavier down. He was an orphan, and Xavier found and trained him. The burden of command, of having the life and death of Xavier's dream resting on his shoulders, is a heavy one.
I can't even, and like, I can't hold that. Just hearing this makes me feel overwhelmed with this burden.
He takes his job seriously, perhaps too seriously. Scott's rigidity can get him into trouble, but occasionally he finds a way to transcend it. Scott knows Jean Grey is in love with him. He loves her too, but doesn't want his feelings to interfere with his need to be the leader of the X-Men. Scott resents rebellious Wolverine, the bane of his existence. Wolverine's a loose cannon, one he must live with but cannot control. Scott has no idea that Wolverine secretly respects him. This revelation would probably bowl him over. Cyclops, more even than Professor X, personifies what this group is all about: community. He is always telling the X-Men to stay in ranks and to work together. The highest compliment you're likely to get from him is good teamwork. Contrast that with Wolverine. Wolverine is Canadian, down to earth. No nonsense. He looks to be in his 30s, but actually was born in 1900. His incredible mutant healing powers keep him young and repair him quickly after injury. His senses, especially smell, are hyper keen. He is gruff, emotional, rebellious, and takes no grief from anybody. He is by far the comic book series' most popular character. Wolverine's skeleton was replaced by one made of super strong metal, adamantium, which helps him withstand punishment. But his most compelling weapons are his massive retractable claws, made of the same material, which can slice through anything. Wolverine tends to be a brooding loner who others take to be unreliable, vicious, and primitive, but who is actually thoughtful and fiercely loyal. The model artists and writers have used in the past for Wolverine is the Clint Eastwood of the Dirty Harry movies. This is a good reference for the terseness of his dialogue and his ability to be relentless and merciless. But Wolverine is far more volatile, emotional, and uncontrollable than Dirty Harry. His real name is Logan. He's traveled the world and seen it all. He has worked for the CIA, the Canadian Special Forces, from which he escaped, went AWOL to join the X-Men. He's fought many battles and has lots of enemies and former lovers. Wolverine has a terrible temper and is merciless in combat. Forget fair play. He is cunning and violent, but he has a great sense of honor. This means if he owes his life to somebody, he will gladly lay it down for them. Logan loves to ride Scott simply because Scott's in charge. He respects Scott, but would never let him actually know it. He disrespects Scott for not taking more initiative, not breaking more rules, and for taking so many orders from Xavier instead of thinking for himself. Wolverine respects no one until they have proved themselves in battle. But even a 13-year-old like Jubilee will receive his loyalty once she has earned it. In fact, Logan feels older brother protective toward Jubilee and genuinely likes her. But if she makes one mistake or steps out of line, he'll certainly let her know.
Wow.
So just, again, the juxtaposition between those two characters and knowing that each one respects the other.
I was just about to say, and yet they both have a level of loyalty to one another.
Yeah.
They both have a respect for Professor X and some aligned values. Really important values are ones that they share. It's just the execution. It's just the way that they see the world. And I think my main point here is both of them react to the loss that they experienced on the team. This great this incident that created trauma for them. Both of those reactions are normal, realistic, appropriate for each of them, and, completely connected to the way that they see the world and the way that the world treats them. And I think that, again, where Cyclops may not have the permission to be as emotional as he wants to be and get into some blurred areas, which is what we need him to do to find true grief, Wolverine is he's never really had the care and the structure and the trust that he needs to calm down and just sit with these feelings and be really authentic about them.
Yeah.
So they're both wrestling with these really intense feelings, and they only really have one way, one outlet to deal with it. What Wolverine ends up doing is leaving the compound and pursuing these villains so that he can rescue Beast and also find retribution, find some kind of resolution in himself about Morph's death.
Yeah.
And we've seen him go rogue before, so that's not surprising. But what drives him is this really big emotional component.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to talk about Beast for a second here too, because we also see the way in which Beast reacts. There's a moment where the Sentinel finds Beast's injured body by the fence, and then there's that guard who's also there, who's pointing his weapon at him, and there's this kind of exchange on who's in charge here between the Sentinel and the guard, which it doesn't matter as much. But that's when Beast realizes that Morph is dead, and he has this immediate emotional just release. So he's crying. He's completely silent. He's sort of crouching in tears.
Kind of gives up.
Absolutely. It
reminds me very much of, I know that you didn't make it all the way through this movie, but it reminds me a lot of Braveheart. There's a moment where at a very important battle, there's a major betrayal.
Okay.
And William just sits down and just kind of lays down and lets it happen. And the person who betrayed him sees what this does to him, and he's like, no, get up, you got to go, you got to get out, you can't be here, you got to go. And so it reminded me very much of that, because you think at this point Beast is probably coherent enough to get out. He's so agile and acrobatic that he could probably get out, but he doesn't. He just lays down and cries.
It's incredibly powerful, because you're right. He gives in to the grief and he becomes vulnerable.
Yeah.
There's a dangerousness and vulnerability about him stopping here. And Beast is taken to he's held captive in this little prisoner's room. And these two, I want to call them mastermind villains. You have the engineer Trask. He's kind of the sciencey guy. And then Gyrick.
Yeah.
I'll never remember that. Gyrick is the leader of the two with these.
And he seems to be more nefarious.
Right. He has this vision. He has this ideology about mutants, really. He wants to prod them. He wants to study them. He wants to
eradicate them.
I think he wants to weaponize them too, but sure. he does believe in them being second-class citizens, and so he's willing to imprison them and
all of this under the radar of the government, because the government is financing this project, but they didn't know that he had already proceeded with doing things like capturing and cataloging mutants. So when the president calls him out on it, he's like, oh, pack up your stuff, Trask. We got to go overseas now. We're going to go do this somewhere else.
Take it international.
By the way, I applaud Eric for the president being a woman.
Yeah. The president is a woman who is all sorts of has all sorts of dynamics, right? She's seen on an elliptical at one point as she's holding meetings. She's doing press conferences. She's she's clearly a very kind of like rich, well-built character, well-developed character.
And she holds Gyrick down a little bit. You know, she's like, she uses her logic to determine that he's not doing something that's particularly good. He's like, these mutants were willing to give up their lives to get rid of information you have. Is there a particular reason for that?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, no, not at all. By the way, he's such a redhead.
A lot of the villains.
Did you notice that when Storm and Wolverine break in, every single one of the guards holding rifles are redheads?
Yes.
They all have the most bright orange hair. This show,
I think it's an anime. You know this more than I do. You've produced a ton of animation. This is.
Well, I haven't produced animation. I've produced DVDs and Blu-rays of animated.
Right. But you've looked at the masters. You do color corrections. Like, you're probably well aware of why so much red is used for hair.
This was a total mistake. Like, this is just somebody overseas using the same color to. I mean, that might have even been a like a time issue where it's like, they're just all this color.
You don't think there's this overestimation of like men, of like American men being redheads?
Of how many gingers are
like European and American men there must be at least 50% of them that are redheaded.
Yeah, it must be at least anyway, that
number. So Beast is imprisoned and he's interrogated, and he refuses to talk. And it isn't so much, you get the sense that he's quiet and he's unwilling for a couple of reasons. Certainly the principle that he won't give up his friends, but he's also still grieving. And Beast is another character who is, somewhat of an enigma, or at least presents in a complex way. This is someone who you'd expect would have a monstrous type of reaction to his friend being killed. He looks like a monster, but he is withdrawn. He has, like you said, he kind of turns inward. He's sentimental. He's passive. He's in his feelings, and he's literally spending hours just hanging upside down, quietly meditating and being thoughtful and grieving his friend. Yeah. And he wants nothing to do with these interrogators who are coming in and trying to get information from him.
Right.
So there's a range, and this is what I really like about the show. There's a range of reactions from main characters who are seen as heroes, and there's no judgment or criticism or a certain interpretation that tells us any one of these reactions is wrong.
Yeah.
That all of us are going to have different ways in which we establish and process grief, and they're still in it. And the show ends not on a happy note, but with many, many characters feeling the sense of heaviness and sorrow.
Yeah. And there's a real sense that what's done is done. There's a certain finality to this loss that I appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
It really does set high stakes for the show. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes from here. We're 2 episodes down out of 13. How does that feel? Like I realize that we're just getting started, but it also feels like, whoa, we only have 11 episodes left.
I think what surprises me, or what really thrills me, what excites me, is that each episode so far, we've only done 2.
Yeah.
But even in a part 2 where you'd expect just a lot of loose ends being tied and resolution, and maybe like a quick or a fast or a cheap ending, that's not this at all.
No.
There continues to be, actually, I think this episode of the 2 deepens our understanding of their personalities, their relationships, the way in which they're, fighting to understand their own identities and how they belong to the X-Men.
Yeah.
Jubilee is still a main character, but becomes almost a little bit, I want to say she becomes a B part of the story as we're getting to know the X-Men and what it is they're about.
She was used as a proxy to introduce us to the concept of X-Men. And then in episode 2, she is sort of tucked away so that we can learn more about the X-Men.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the show, she is officially recruited to go to the school.
Yeah.
for the
Yes.
kids,
There's somewhat of a solid next chapter for her
Yeah.
that they set up when she joins the school.
and a mutual understanding with her foster parents. And I'm not sure the foster parents are allowed to make this kind of decision, because you would think that the foster care system would be able to determine what school she goes to.
Yeah,
But
it would.
she's like, foster mom, foster dad, I'm going over there because it's just a better fit for me.
I've decided to join the academy.
Yeah.
There in the real world, yes, there is a case manager, there's a counselor, there is there's a regulatory agency, there's a government, usually a county regulated agency that's helping with resources and finding all of the different supports and services for this young person. The young person can make decisions, but it really has to be supported and really strategized and worked with these other personnel and these other folks that are a part of the system. I will say, and please don't hang up on me, there's a third, or there's like another character.
Okay.
We're talking about the X-Men.
Why would I hang up on you?
Look, because I'm about to say it, but there's the the mutants, there's the humans, there's another character, and that's the media. And this show implements the media's perspective, the way the media imposes ideas to the communities.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, and it's usually done in a way where there's like a TV on, or there's a quick news story. I think in this instance, Wolverine is in the bar, and there's like the news is on in one of the TVs behind the bar, and we hear the way in which this recent incident is talked about, and they paint a picture that the X-Men recruited the Sentinels to help them break in to this government building and infiltrate in order to get these materials. And that's not true at all.
And you can see why the people in the bar then act the way they do.
Absolutely.
Knowing there's a mutant in
this
their
is why
bar.
Jubilee doesn't want to be a part of it at all. There's a bias against the mutants that the media has a huge participation in.
And it goes back to the first time we saw the media, where the very first thing you see is Sabretooth wrecking a city, and the only images of mutants that you see are negative images.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about actually is the Sentinels, only in that Wolverine and Gambit and Storm and Cyclops and Rogue do battle the Sentinels again at the end of this episode to save Jubilee. And there's a sense of, I think that there's this vengeful aspect where Wolverine is attacking one of the Sentinels. And I think at one point he says, like, this is for Morph or something like
Oh, yeah. This one's for Morph. And
but this is a
he
robot.
Just starts shredding this robot.
But this robot isn't sentient. This robot does not know who Morph is, doesn't care, won't have feelings about it, is basically, disabled. Like all of the electrical wires come
from like beating your fist against a wall when you're
That's my whole point.
Yeah.
The point is this is for Wolverine.
Yeah, it's not for Morph.
It's for Morph. It's not for the Sentinel. This is for Wolverine.
Yeah.
And he's able to kind of process and get those intense emotions out. It's not the same thing as working through what that loss is with another person.
Yeah.
Again, the way we talked about human to human. I did it. Mutant to mutant, person to person.
Well, the mutants are still humans.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're trying to put them into another. You're trying to Genosha them already.
No, I don't want to erase their identities by just calling them humans. I'm not giving them the dignity and honor they deserve. But person to person, how is he truly experiencing that sense of reconciliation, that sense of coming to terms with his friend's death?
Yeah.
And it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be one battle. It's not going to be one conflict. He's going to work through this time after time after time.
I mean, if he's been around since 1900,
this
is just one more trauma on top of.
I would even posit they were not that close. This ain't even about Morph, right? This ain't about Morph.
This is just someone that like they say in the writer's Bible, if you earn his respect and then you go and die, especially you go and die sacrificing yourself for him, he's never going to let that go.
Yeah.
That's going to be a driving force for at least the next 10 years until he meets someone else. That it's similar to the way they talk about, like, if Wookiees are really as old as they are, then Han Solo is more like his pet. Like,
what?
where it's like when you've got a character that's like a couple hundred years old, you got a person who's going to die at 70, 80. Like, you're going to have more of them over the course of your life. And so Han Solo is more like Chewbacca's pet.
Way to make things super sad.
And so Wolverine, who's been alive since 1900, is like, oh, I lost another one, but now I'm gonna put a hash mark in my bedpost so that I can know exactly how many friends I've lost over my 93 years. Yeah. There's a lot about Wolverine that I like from the comics written well after even the Claremont.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah. Like I know that we talked, this is the episode that won't ever go up, but we talked to Paul Jenkins at great length about his decision.
I love that story. Yeah.
That origin story is so great. The idea that, and this is what Paul brings to a story like this and a character like this, is the idea that he can't remember his past simply because it's so traumatic that his mutant ability considers that an injury and resolves it by making him forget. You know,
that's
like, it's
brilliant.
Such a great.
I think it's so brilliant, that concept.
You think it's like a government thing, like the government wiped his memories and now he's just trying to figure out who he is. But no, it's his own body,
his psyche.
Yeah,
his psyche subdued and erased that trauma as a way of healing, because he has the healing factor. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
What's the name of that comic? Why am
Origin.
Or it's called Origin.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good one.
Not to be confused with Wolverine Origin. That's a movie that's really bad.
I like all the X-Men movies. Sorry.
Oh, you do?
Not sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I like something about all of them.
No one's asking to apologize. Everyone's allowed to like something. You know what? It's unfair of me to say it's a bad movie.
There you go.
Here's why. I've never seen it. I have literally never seen Wolverine Origin.
This is the one where he's
it's his first solo movie.
So he's up in Canada a bit. He meets
maybe
some. I saw it one time.
I have not seen it because it just looked bad to me. And if I'm honest, I've never really truly loved an X-Men movie outside of maybe X2.
Well, you did like Logan, though, I'm sure. Does that count?
Oh, I liked Logan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked Logan because it's a good final story, you know, but I've never fully thought that anyone has genuinely brought the X-Men to the screen particularly well as a team and as a unit. I was always just happy with them because I was happy to have X-Men movies, but I've never liked or I've never loved any of them. So there's that. So it's unfair of me to criticize Wolverine Origin.
This is what we're going to watch the next time we watch a movie. We'll watch
Negatory Good Movie. I'm going to keep it exactly because then I don't want to hate it because I dislike it so much.
I don't think it's as bad as you think it is, by the way.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. I think with that, we can move on to the next episode, appropriately titled Intermagneto.
Oh.
Yeah. It's going to be a doozy, one that you're going to love, I'm sure. Drea, until then, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or on socials at Dr. Drea Psychology. You can check out our message system. You can leave a voice memo on my website, drdreapsychology.com. Just look for that speak pipe button. It's an orange button. Record. I've been saying 2 minutes. Apparently,
it might be closer to 90 seconds.
It seems like it's 90 seconds, which is fine. You can record a couple of them. in a row, and we will listen. We do listen to all of our messages. We don't always air all the messages, but we will listen to them. And sometimes if you have an email associated with it, we will reply.
Speaking of which, if you specifically have questions about X-Men going forward, please leave a speak pipe. We are more able to air those during our discussions. But if you want to talk about anything we have talked about in the past, or anything that we've talked about reading, someone just sent us messages about Tom King's Riddler, One Bad Day comic, which we posted about having read over at Patreon. And we have decided we're going to take that question and we're going to answer it. Not yet. No, but it'll go online. And so if you have anything you want to discuss, send us questions via SpeakPipe or email or social media, and we will sit down and answer it here on camera with good audio, and we will post it online so that we can have additional conversations that aren't just what we are covering in any given episode. It was a great idea, Enzo, and we're gonna take it. So be on the lookout for an answer to your topic. Meanwhile, you can find me. I am mostly on Instagram at B_Ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions or Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can email us, arkhamsessions@gmail.com. Be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Come follow us over on Facebook, and join our Patreon, where you can get a shout out for our appreciation for making these episodes possible, such as Aaron Winrick, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, Antonio Lopez, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Heroes Journey Fitness, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, Swara Sali, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, Eric O'Sullivan, Dr. Girlfriend, and my father, Carl Ward. Thank you all for making these episodes possible. You can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. $1 will get you in. You can read all of our updates. You can get the episodes early, and a whole bunch of other benefits depending on the tiers that you choose, including watching us do these podcasts on camera. Drea,
I have a special shout out to give to @TurtleDustin, who gave the Arkham Sessions a mention on YouTube at the fandom/Screen Junkies video all about Spider-Man and therapy.
Nice.
I don't usually read the comments on YouTube for
That's
any
just
reason.
toxic.
I know, but I happened to see it. So @TurtleDustin, thank you so much for giving Arkham Sessions a shout out.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
So long, suckers!